Good evening, and welcome to another episode of Apolitically Incorrect Guyana. My name is KIAN JABOUR, and I will be your host this evening. I'd like to again apologize for my absence. I know this seems to be becoming a pattern. My apologies. I've been in and out of the country a lot, and it's been the summer, as everyone knows. To be very honest with you, I spent a lot of this time with my daughter. So my apologies, but I'm doing my best to be here as much as I possibly can. And I think more importantly than that, I tried to bring on some very, very interesting guests with me. And you guys are very familiar with my current guest. I tried to get him on here as often as I possibly could because, like you guys, I myself enjoy and learn a lot from his knowledge and his conversations on quite a few of these topics that are varying in and around Guyana. I do want to jump straight into a conversation here with you because I know it is what a lot of people are asking now. ANUG successfully, through the joinder, has been privileged enough to have a seat in Parliament here in Guyana. And the time is split between the various organizations that were part of the joinder. And for the next 2.5 years, it is ANUG's time. The transition is about to happen, I think, come November, if I'm not mistaken. November, ANUG goes into Parliament. And I would like to hear from yourself, the General Secretary, speaking as the General Secretary of ANUG now, what the people can expect. I'll talk as host, ask you some questions that I'm sure the people would like to hear a little bit about. But what does ANUG have planned for their time in Parliament between now and the 2025 elections?
Well, I'd like to say right away that unless ANUG tells me I have permission to speak on its behalf, I'm not going to speak on its behalf. But I can tell you what I personally have in mind. We are very good at complaining and at identifying the flaws that we see, the faults that we see. We enjoy too much, I think, the scandals and the horrors and the blood and the gore of our deteriorating society. So when a minister is scandalized, it's in all the news, and then public attention is turned very quickly to something else. Some bandit is shot, another couple of days, public attention is turned to something else. But each of these incidents is a symptom of the underlying decay and rot in the society, which has resulted from the breakdowns in all of our systems. And you hear various people give superficial excuses. Some of them blame the colonial masters, some of them blame capitalism, some of them blame morality, and the religious folk blame the non-religious blame the religious. At the end of the day, the reason our society has deteriorated is that we, having started off at doing quite well as a newly independent country with sound financial structure, we embarked on an economic pattern of family and friends, which led to the deterioration of the economy under a dictatorship which was rigged and therefore could not be removed. That was camouflaged by the fact that the two large parties are ethnically based. So half of the country really didn't mind very much that there was a dictatorship in place and overlooked the fact that everything was deteriorating and our best teachers and our best nurses and our best professionals, our best administrators were all migrating, all in a headlong rush to Tamari Airport to get out of the country and get out of the disaster that they saw coming. So what we've got now is the end result of a brain drain. We have people that are not very competent, that are pretending to be competent to run the country and making decisions that do not solve problems. But the people who vote for them don't really care as long as the people in charge look like them. And we are seeing the decay and the rot on a gradual decline all the way through. So half the country tries to praise Burnham, for example, for providing free education, without recognizing that what he did was inherit a very good education system from the British, try to fund that purely with state resources from a diminishing revenue base. And the end result was that there was a gradual deterioration from one of the best education systems in the Commonwealth to one where we were begging Sri Lankans to come in the 1980s, Sri Lankan teachers to come in when Sri Lanka had their civil war, to teach in our schools. So that kind of deterioration happened gradually, but people are happy to ignore it. What I want to do in the next 2.5 years is to point out what our institutions should look like, what the legislative structure is, and how it can work, so that the Guyanese are in a position to see where systems have failed, where systems have been compromised or bypassed. And I want, this is me personally speaking, not ANUG, I will be proposing, maybe fortnightly, changes to legislation or different means to enforce legislation so that we can reinstitute the systems that work, and we can find ways around the breakdown in the systems that has happened.
If you don't mind, give me some examples. I mean, we got to remember that the public out there, and I'm going to be very honest, are dealing with their everyday lives. Nobody is as involved in the political structure as we could hope, or people should be at least. So I'm going to ask you, as you continue, just to try and get as much detail, just a few examples of what you're talking about, so people can understand what kind of ideas you're coming with here.
Okay, I can give you an immediate example about how there's a lack of appreciation among our leadership as to the importance of systems. We had a disaster in Madhya. 20 children died. There was a fire set, and the children could not get out, and they died. They were burned alive. The entire country mourned and ranted and raged and wanted to see something done. So nothing happened. Our leaders sidestepped, our leaders avoided, our leaders pointed fingers in other directions. And eventually, it was decided that there would be a commission of inquiry. Now, in my mind, we have discussed the factors that led up to this disaster as a breakdown in systems. So we needed to discuss who was responsible for the design of the building and the decision to put in bars in the windows and lock the doors so that it was a jail rather than a school and people couldn't get out. We needed to understand why there was a complete absence of any infrastructure to put out fires. So no fire hydrants nearby, no fire extinguishers in the school. We needed to understand why there wasn't a fire prevention system, so no sprinklers, no smoke detectors. We needed to understand why there's no personnel in the school, no adults, supervisors, guards, to look after the children, to care for them as custodians, and therefore to be alert when the fire was small rather than when it was raging. We needed to understand how we came to this cliff that we're at because of the breakdown of all of these systems that did not allow these things to be in place. So we hear about a commission of inquiry. And the immediate question that was asked was, what will be the terms of reference, the scope of inquiry for this commission? Will they be able to look at all of these things to understand who is responsible for fire prevention, for firefighting, for the custodians? Who was responsible for receiving the United Nations report previously that pointed out all of these hazards, but somebody ignored it
and the fire
ducked
service.
it?
Yeah.
Who was responsible for receiving the fire service alarm and ducked it? We needed a commission of inquiry that holistically would look at all of those things as a way to establish what system existed, what system broke down, whether the system was implemented or if the system was defective. Mm-hmm. And today I see in the Stabrook News that the terms of reference of the Commission of Inquiry are simply to find out how the fire started and what's the way forward. Now, none of that is going to solve the huge problem that we are facing, that our systems are falling down. And the fact that the terms of reference are confined just to how did the fire start? We know the fire started. And we know how the children died. They died in a fire. What we don't know is what systemic failures occurred, who were responsible for implementing the system, and if they implemented the system properly. And that's what we need to know, so as to avoid it happening again. the lack of appreciation that the system is more important, to me, betrays either a complete lack of competence in our leadership or a willingness by our leadership to avoid accountability and to prevent any inquiry from identifying the people who should be accountable. That is what I'm talking about in systems.
Right.
Now, one of the systems that we have seen established in Guyana since independence is the majority government, the government using its majority in parliament to pass laws which give it dictatorial powers. And that is something that I want to point out, item by item. The first and immediate example that comes to mind for me is that legislation that is passed, and you will see it. I invite anyone to look at legislation that is being passed. A slew of legislation has been passed in the last year. So a commission is appointed to give licenses to import fuel, or a commission is appointed to decide how we're spending money. A commission is appointed for the ID cards. Each of these commissions, the legislation will show, is appointed by the minister. So the minister takes instructions from the small core of the PPP Central Committee. He then, following those instructions, appoints 3 or 4 of his friends who are all PPP loyalists to a commission, and that commission will therefore act absolutely on the instructions of the minister, who himself is acting on the instructions of the small core of the PPP Central Committee.
And if they don't, they will be fired.
Yes. Now, that is a system designed for disaster in a country where we all will acknowledge corruption is increasing, and more importantly, half of the country does not like the present government and wants the government out and feels excluded. A government that wants to run the country for all Guyanese will find a way to exercise its power in a way that shows inclusivity, so that the people who are representing that excluded half have a say and are inside. The prime example I can give of corruption, the perception of corruption, because we don't know if it's corruption, we're just outside looking in, because we're outside. That's what the system does. It puts those folk who aren't in government outside. The perception of corruption and a way to avoid it is in central housing. There is a community in Sparendam where there are very large houses. Those houses have been allocated to people who are perceived as powerful in government, and they're allocated because it used to be land controlled by central housing. Central housing and planning is there for the purpose of providing housing to citizens of Guyana. So no one could say it wasn't doing its job. But the question must be asked, how is it that these few select people who are given this very expensive prime real estate? Was there what used to happen long ago? You put your hand in a bag and draw out a lot number, so that there's total transparency in the system of how you're allocating houses. Why weren't those people given house lots in Eccles or in Horstellin or in Enterprise? Why did those specific people get those house lots there in those prime locations in Sparendam? Is it because those people controlled the board at Central Housing and Planning because the Housing Act empowers them to decide who will be on that board, who will people that board, so that they are in a position to put their friends and family on that board who will take instructions from them? Is that the reason? From the outside, that's the perception. And the solution for me is that the Housing Act should say that Central Housing and Planning will be run by a board, so that the Board of Central Housing does what it does, which is identify land, allocate it for housing, make house lots, develop it. But the board is peopled, 2 appointed by the government, 2 appointed by the leader of the opposition, and 1 appointed by a third party. So that when you have a Pradoville 2, the people on the outside who are looking on will have to say to themselves, well, however that was done, however Central Housing and Planning decided to give house lots, 2 people who represented our interests were there on the board, and therefore we got to ask them questions. They have to be answerable to us. That is what inclusivity is about, and that is how you lend to governance for the entire country, not governance for half. That is how you get rid of the perception that you are only looking after half of the country. I think that there are many, many instances where suggestions can be made to change the structure of our systems for that kind of inclusivity. And all it needs is some small tweaks to legislation. And what I propose personally to do, and with help from some others, is to identify those changes that can be made and propose to ANUG that their representative in Parliament propose those changes and wait to see what happens. What you can be sure of is that the government of the day, whether it's PPP or PNC, will say no, as long as they have the majority in Parliament, because their majority allows them to control the purse strings. Central Housing, EPA, Energy Agency that gives fuel import licenses, every single commission, every single board, every single body, controlled by government. So as long as government, whether it's PPP or PNC, controls Parliament and has the majority in Parliament, the problem will continue. And any such proposals will not be accepted by the majority. It needs a majority opposition in Parliament, but it can be done.
All right. I hope most of you have kind of wrapped your head around that. I know that it seems to be a long and drawn out type of understanding, but let's be honest, in order for real change to occur in this country, it comes in a systematic approach, and it all begins with Parliament. There's a reason that organizations have come about throughout history, whether it be WPA, whether it be AFC, whether it be and multiple others that have come along as third parties. What we have accomplished through these third parties, unfortunately, has been very, underwhelming. The argument always lends to, well, we keep giving our vote to a third party and they keep, doing the same thing, which is joining one of the larger organizations. And then all of a sudden, these ideas that you have of changing the systems and forcing them to make changes in Parliament because you've created a minority government falls through the door because everybody involved with the party is interested in power. What's your response to that?
You're talking about the AFC.
Well, the AFC obviously is our most recent, kind of let down. And everybody, and I want to make this clear, and I think this is a very interesting point. As much as I will sit here and be one of the first to say that AFC was an absolute disappointment and in no way, shape, or form did what we hoped they would do, which is bring some balance, bring some control back down to the people, ensure that these two governments of PPP and PNC were not in absolute power and basically doing what they're doing now, which is making decisions on their own and not consulting anyone else and benefiting themselves. But I will say this, and I want to be very clear about this because I think a lot of people miss this fact. Everyone right now says, oh, after what AFC did, we don't trust any third parties. That's always the first thing. Look, AFC should have helped us, but they didn't. I want to be the first to point out, in 2015, when AFC and APNU came together and joined, not a single one of us, and I say us because I was there, not a single one of us said, no, this is wrong, they shouldn't do it. We all praised and enjoyed and rejoiced and said, yes, this is our best chance to get rid of PPP. And I want to make that very clear in understanding hindsight is 2020. We could all go back and we could all say what should have happened and what should have done, or we could all say all about the disappointments after. But the mistake was made at that point. And I want to know what ANUG, in your opinion, where anyone can look to have more trust or have learned from the previous mistakes.
Well, let me disagree with you first and stick my neck out a bit. When it was announced that AFC, which I had always supported from the inception, had decided to join up with PNC for the 2015 election, at the time the chairman was Nigel Hughes, who is one of the most charismatic and competent leaders out there, and I would like to see him run in PNC one day. I think he might make a change. But he was the chairman, and I said to him, we were in Avenue of the Republic standing up outside the Bank of Guyana, having just done an arbitration. I said to him, I believe this was a mistake, that AFC could not withstand the pressure of a partnership with the PNC and would be subsumed and would not be able to prevent the excesses by the PNC. And he didn't disagree, but he said you needed to have faith. Mm-hmm. Well, it turned out exactly that way. But I also made a mistake, and I'll tell you this. What I've realized is that many of the people in the AFC were not pushing back against the PNC. They were hand in hand, shoulder to shoulder, agreeing with all of those excesses. And that bothered me because that has made me question my own judgment of the individuals in the AFC who I thought were representing a middle ground, a moderate ground that was more balanced. The problem that we had with the AFC and that the AFC had with us is that the AFC did not recognize the interests, the priorities, and the ethics of the middle ground people that were supporting them. They felt that they were just trying to get more seats, get more votes, and what they really should have been trying to do is find a way to mediate between the two large parties using the one thing that they wanted and one thing that they had for the first time in Guyana's history, the swing vote in Parliament. And I should have known better, because for the 5 years that the AFC had that swing vote in Parliament, sitting down in a majority opposition in Parliament, they did nothing at all. Mm-hmm. And there was so much good that they could have done. And given the number of lawyers in the AFC, the number of people who should have been qualified to recognize the needs, make the legislative changes so that there was inclusivity, I should have been alerted in 2015 that when they preferred to join up with PNC to take power in the same rules, in the same structure where that power gave them dictatorial power, although shared with the PNC, that itself was a problem. A third party needs to say to Guyana and needs to say to the people who recognize the harm in the two parties, here's the truth. We're not going to win the election, but we can do what AFC did, which is to get the swing vote in Parliament. And I guarantee you that whichever of the large parties is in opposition will agree with measures taken to put them in the driver's seat where the purse strings are, so that they have the decision-making power in central housing, in EPA, in the Energy Agency, in NISIL, in GPL, in GAIWA, all of those places where there are boards and commissions, in the Petroleum Fund. And all of those changes can be made with a simple majority, an opposition majority in Parliament, which is what AFC should have been doing all along and didn't.
Okay. So, with a swing vote, I'd like to break these kind of things down as much as we possibly can, because I think people need to understand a little bit more about our governance structure to really understand. There's 65 seats in Parliament, and what the third party is looking to do is to find themselves in a position between the two larger parties, let's say even with one seat in the middle. You're looking at 32, sorry, it has to be 2 seats, right?
No, it could be one.
It could be one.
32, 32, 1.
32, 32, 1. 35 seats. Sorry, 65 seats in Parliament. Sorry. Right. So what has to happen here is essentially a guarantee or a promise. The people have to believe that that third party will not allow themselves to be consumed or to join any of the two larger parties, or else we're back to square one. So how exactly do we gain that that trust in the public? How does the public know, you know what, I need to give, and I can answer the question, but I need to know that the public can trust that ANUG won't do that. How does this happen?
Well, we can fancy it up and we can say we signed agreements and we made pledges and all of these things. Mm-hmm. But I'm only one man sitting here. And all I can say is that if the individuals in ANUG ever decided to go that route, they would do it without me. And okay. I would immediately and very publicly inform the public why it is that they are doing what they're doing and why it is they're doing it without me. So me sitting here can only speak for myself. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you, it won't be me. You see, in a society that is divided demographically with two main races, And that has been diluted. And there are a lot of party loyalists who say you can't talk about ethnic voting anymore because there are only 33% Indo-Guyanese and 28% Afro-Guyanese and all that kind of foolishness. At the end of the day, we are voting along ethnic lines. And as long as we are doing so, as long as you have two parties who can be identified ethnically and two groups of people who identify ethnically with those parties, that in itself is a problem. Because what it means is that Griffith is the enemy of Posad. That is what it means. And in our country, that is not the case. And it should not be allowed to be the case, perpetuated by these two parties. So once you settle in your mind that the two parties structurally are problematic, you can't support either one. And if you compromise that particular ethical position, that particular moral position, by saying, man, I'm going to wink and I'm going to join this one because that other one doing so much stupidness, you have become part of what is a system that is breaking down Guyana and has broken down Guyana for 50 odd years. So it can't happen. Not for me sitting here, not for me personally.
You said something about fancying up what ANUG has done. I want to elaborate on that a little bit for me.
Well, when ANUG started, we immediately, the founding people, Ralph Ramkaran, Henry Jeffrey, myself, we created a charter which we signed on to, where we all undertook in writing that we would not be joining with one of the two large parties against the other large party. And it was a good thing to do at the time because it solidified that position, and it was something that it was a talking point that we could say to anybody. And it's there and it's valid. I don't think anybody is going to sue us on it. But I've learned more and more that it sometimes is a distraction to talk about deeds and charters and things in writing. It fancies things up, but that in itself is a distraction. And the truth is the truth. The truth has a ring about it that everybody understands. And my truth is I'm not doing it. Tim Jonas is not going to be doing that. So you could like it or lump it, but that's where I am now, trying my best just to point out what is a true position, and you will judge me by it or not.
Yeah. I'll give my opinion. I have a very simple stance as again, not as a trained lawyer, but somebody that can maybe weed through these very technical systems and so on that need to occur. But as a very basic citizen standpoint, coming from a young businessman's perspective, the reality is I've learned very quickly in life that if you want something different, you kind of got to do something different.
Yeah.
And I've learned, even now, I think what's been hitting me over and over here in Guyana is that I have, even up to this morning, I had one of my suppliers for my business chatting with me. And he looked at me and he said, very calmly said, you know what I've realized? I've realized that as a small, medium scale businessman that wants to develop, wants to grow, I want to buy more trucks to distribute my product. I want to bring down my manufacturing costs. I want to do all these things. I need a bigger piece of land. I realized quickly that unless, and I mean this, I'll quote him, unless I kiss the government's ass, I'm not getting the opportunity to grow. And he said, I can't understand functioning in this society. I realized I don't want to be political. I don't want to go and stand up on a stage and shout PPP or PNC. I just want to run my business and the opportunity to grow equally. He said, unless I have a government contract, which are the only people that we see growing in the country, you very quickly realize that this is just a system designed to control us. He said, I cannot even get a duty free to bring in another truck. But I can see all the PPP counterparts or PNC counterparts doing it to sell my products. Unless I go out there and stand up with a red shirt and rally with them. And he's saying, this is illogical. What he went on to explain to me is like, all I'm seeing are roads being built, but I'm seeing no substance for the people. I'm seeing nobody actually build individually. All I'm watching is the party build, and then the party people build roads. That's what I'm seeing.
And without a holistic plan, that's all we're going to have. And you will have noticed, I'm sure, that Parliament, the government using its majority in Parliament, has more than doubled the debt ceiling, local and foreign. So that is more money available, borrowed against the security of the oil money that's in a bank in New York. That is more money available to award contracts to the favored few to build roads, bridges, whatever they feel needs to be built.
All right.
But Kian, more than that, I've seen something about government economics that I don't think a lot of people grasp. There is a decision to make the railway embankment a 4-lane highway. Horrendous decision, horrible, because there are so many bottlenecks in that highway that all that's going to happen there is that it's going to be the equivalent of the 4-lane highway that goes through Agricola. It's just going to be 4 cars in a row in a bottleneck, moving slowly into a bottleneck. But just a year ago, major work was done on 2 bridges in LBI and Maripo. The old bridges were taken out, a set of time, a set of money.
1 year ago.
Traffic was diverted.
Yeah.
So that new concrete bridges, solid structures could be put in. 2 lanes.
2 lanes. That's
a year
right.
later,
That's right.
we got to tear all of that down to make something 4 lanes.
Right.
Now, here's the thing, and this is government economics at work. If you are building your business, you're going to make sure you buy a product that is going to last you for a number of years. You make a profit off of that product so that your returns are good. Government economics is free money. The revenue raised from taxes and from oil money is free. It's coming in all the time. So it doesn't matter to government if they're fiscally responsible, if they're making a profit, if they're making a good investment. What is important is that contracts need to be continuously offered as a carrot to keep people loyal. Crumbs need to be given so that, as you say, people have to stay quiet. So it doesn't matter that last year a set of money was spent, contracts awarded to build 2-lane bridges, and now those 2-lane bridges will be torn down a year later to make 4-lane bridges, because it's just a new cycle of contracts being offered. And I'm seeing that more and more. The horrendous waste of money.
Well, can I just bring up an article here, and hopefully this lends to your. Can I ask the operators to please bring up the Gaisuko article that I had given you. This has been in the news just within the last week, within the last couple of days, when the government has now asked. Here it is. The government has now asked and approved with their majority another 1.5 billion in the supplementary budget to be allocated to Gaisuko. I'll quickly read it. The government is pouring more money into the local sugar company Gaisuko as it continues with its efforts to turn around the fortunes of the company. Another 1.5 billion has been allocated to the company as part of the government's latest supplementary budget. The government is hoping that the money will boost the production and assist the management of the company. So, I am going to ask you, Mr. Jonas, is this one of the examples that you are giving?
It's exactly the example I'm giving. But I don't want us to concentrate our attention only on the government's attempt to raise Gaisuko from the dead. When the PNC decided to close down Gaisuko, that was a decision that was implemented in a way that was so uncaring and so unfeeling that they could never have come back from that politically in places like Berbice. So many people were thrown out of work by a callous and uncaring government who felt those people far away and don't look like us and we don't care about it, and they closed it down. Now, the starting point with Gaisuko was that it was profitable back in the 70s. It was briefly profitable again in the 80s under Hoyt, when he brought in the same foreigners who had been looking after it to manage it. But because of the appointment of family and friends to senior positions in the Gaisuko management, starting with Burnham and going all the way down, Gaisuko slowly became less and less profitable. And when you combine that with the other factors like the fall in the sugar price and the Lome Convention and all of those things, it ran into problems. The thing is, there was no effort to diversify. There was no effort to fix it, and there was no effort to consolidate and become more efficient, except what Hoyt did in his brief reign. So you had a situation where instead of making money, the government found itself throwing money into Gaisuko. And it continued to do so up to 2015 because the Gaisuko workers were PPP supporters. They were government supporters. When that changed in 2015, it no longer, with government economics, remember government economics is not about making money. The money is coming in free, it's revenue. So it is about how to spend this money so that the people who are voting for you continue to vote for you. And you got to do it visibly and show them, because we care. So the money was spent until 2015, and then PNC dropped the hammer. All of those people on the breadline, an atrocious decision. It should have been done so much more carefully. Then, although it had been declining, although it was not making money, although now it was closed down and shuttered so that those estates were starting to rust, the fields were fallow. It's no longer an ongoing business. It is now something that is there, that is dormant. The PPP decided that they would restart it, not as an economic decision, but they were taking free revenue money that they were getting to pump billions to revive something that had died before the PNC officially wrote the death certificate and declared it dead. That's where we are. So again, we are seeing economics that has nothing to do with fiscal responsibility. It is economics that says we got free oil money, we flush with funds, how do we spend it? Let's throw it into Gaisuko. And the country is going to suffer for this.
Well, I'm gonna I know we're into the show fully here, and I want to bring up a few more interesting conversations as far as systems goes. And this, I think, is a very interesting discussion to be had with you. I'm going to ask the operator, please bring up the Hickens' tenure as top cop extended to date to be determined. It's just a headline that you guys can read, but nonetheless, you can discuss with me a little bit. I mean, it's something that has been in an ongoing debate. The main opposition, being APNU, AFC, have come out and said they're against it. The president has gone ahead with it since then. Nonetheless, I think it's important to mention that Commissioner Hickens is an acting commissioner of police. And I'd like to get you to weigh in a little bit on what is currently occurring in Guyana. And I'll ask you to tie this in with something else, just as a two-part question, so you can kind of bring it all together. The next headline I'm going to ask them to bring up is the president's headline saying that the statistics show that crime is down in Guyana. And this is a very interesting headline that I think, other than the foreigners, the people living in America that feel they know everything about Guyana and continue to give their opinion without any justification, just based on headlines, I'd like to point out that I don't think there are any Guyanese in this entire country that will agree that that crime is down in this country. They may agree that the statistics show that, almost based on the fact that I don't think anybody even reports crimes anymore because nothing is done. But again, I'm getting into social ills and whatnots here. But nonetheless, I want to tie that back into the fact that there's now the extended tenure of Mr. Hickens, the acting commissioner of police, and talk to me about how the flaws in the system are perpetuating social ills like crime being rampant.
I wouldn't like to tie it to the commissioner of police. I don't know him. I've never met him. But from what I've read and what I've seen about him, he has performed his job calmly and competently. I have not seen flashes of hubris. I haven't seen examples of any problems with him. I've seen a steady pattern of doing your duty. But again, this is me looking from far away, not from within. Now, that deals with him as an individual. As a system, we have a huge problem because the government of the day recognizes that the police force and the military, so our armed forces, do not support the government. And the reason for that, again, is our ethnic composition. So that's one truth. So let's get that out the way. Whoever wants to quarrel about that can quarrel. But the truth, again, is the truth. Therefore, it's important from the government's point of view, politically, to try to pick and choose to ensure that the people who are promoted are not completely hostile to them, first of all, but also to see if they can control that process of promotions and that process of favoritism so that they have a carrot to dangle. That is why, you will remember months ago, there was a furor about the unilateral action by the government in terminating the appointments of the Police Service Commission before their time. It went to court, it was deemed unlawful, but the Police Service Commission is the entity that deals with appointments and promotions. So, first of all, if you perceive the Police Service Commission to be peopled by individuals who are hostile to you, you can't go to them and work with them, you got to get rid of them. So they were terminated. Lawful or not, doesn't matter, because by the end of the day, they are now gone and have been replaced. Immediately after that, there was a slew of promotions. There has not been a slew of promotions since then. But those promotions, according to the perception, because of the timing, how it was done, being done at a time when the existing members of the Service Commission said, we don't approve, we don't agree with this, it had that taint. How does a government that recognizes that the armed forces may not be friendly seek to maintain control of those armed forces? The only way is by trying to control appointments, trying to control promotions, and I rather suspect that the government is having a difficult time trying to figure out who is going to replace Hickens. So it's a political issue. It is not a reflection on Hickens, who has demonstrated himself to be competent, but it has another problem. You see, you got to think about morale and goodwill. And you got professionals in the police force, professionals in the army who are upwardly mobile. Those boys want to be promoted. They want to move on up in the world. They're already not getting enough money as salary. They already see themselves and their leaders as outside and ostracized. The one hope left is promotions and advancement in their careers. And if you put a stopgap, if you put a bottleneck that the man at the top is stuck there until further notice, you're going to have resentment. And I think that's what we're seeing. And I think that's what we're going to see more of. Again, the system is important, and the system must contemplate that there's a police service commission that deals with these issues, that will appoint a substantive commissioner of police. It should not be at the whim of individual politicians. It should be under a system done by a commission where members from both sides of our political divide have input. And if the system does not allow that, there will always be a problem.
You know, I'm gonna bring up the fact that you're continuously stating that there needs to be input from both sides. Now, we're coming off of a 2020 election. I'm going to ask some hard questions. We're coming off of a 2020 election here, in which there was an attempted rig. All right, there was an alleged attempted rig. Well, you can call it alleged if you want. I mean, you and I both know we were in the meat of the situation. Nonetheless, it hasn't been tried in court again. I think all of you might need to ask yourselves why. Nonetheless, this situation has arrived at you now stating, as the country has reached this point of stating, we need input from both sides. We need to hear from the PNC and the PPP. You are part of a third party. Now, if you are saying there needs to be input from the two parties, I'd like you to describe to me why, first of all, that is necessary, especially after one of the parties just attempted to rig the election. And now you're dealing with another party that's gone in there and have gone completely power drunk and helping themselves to every dollar, every situation possible. Now I have to ask you, why is this an occurrence and how is it resolved? And I'd like you to, I know you're going to get into a lot of systems, but we have to get to the meat of where the people can get involved and to help this type.
Okay. The reason is that because humanity, all men have feet of clay. So that if you give someone an opportunity to steal, chances are, if no one is looking, he's going to steal. Now, if deals can be done in closed rooms with closed doors, no one's looking, chances are somebody's going to steal. So the reason that we are going up on the corruption index is that more and more our structures allow deals to be made and contracts to be awarded and decisions to be made in secret, clandestinely, with a perception of corruption. The only way to prevent corruption is transparency. Corruption does not like the light of day. It does not like to be held up for scrutiny. And the only way to ensure that deals are held up for scrutiny is to put the good, the bad, and the ugly from both sides. Both sides got honest people, both sides got thieves. But if both sides have representatives when those decisions are being made, then you hold up to the light of day transparent transactions, and you avoid the family and friends issue. You would not have a situation where you got a small clique of contractors getting all the contracts if you had PNC folk in that room saying, why is the contract being awarded to this person? Why is it that you shortlist 3 people for a contract in Corriverton? 2 of them are contractors who come from Wakenham Island, and 1 of them is a contractor who comes from Corriverton. How do you expect the Wakenham people to compete equally with that man? Clearly, you have preordained that that man is going to win the contract. That is corrupt. And if the other side, if the PNC membership were present in those decision-making processes, it would be more difficult for the corrupt folk who are implementing those corrupt decisions to get away with it with impunity. So this isn't a situation of, oh, we can't trust them. This is a situation of the people do not trust either of them. The people are aware both of them are corrupt. And therefore, the way to stop it is to put them to guard each other. And that's the only way to do it. So that when now someone says, how that man got a contract and making all that money, the answer will be, but aren't your leaders also there and approving the award of the contract to that same man that you're quarreling about? It cannot be, oh, those people corrupt.
Yeah.
It has to be, our people corrupt too.
So tell me, and then what is the role of the third parties?
Okay. I'll give you an example again. People will remember Chronicle, the rag that is government owned and pretends to be a newspaper. Before 2015 elections, there was an editorial by the Chronicle that warned that if David Granger was elected as president, there would be rivers of blood. I don't know if people remember that. I could not believe that an editorial could come out from even a rag like the Chronicle saying that. Switch now to when the PNC was in power, and you had a slew of articles and editorials condemning the PPP folk, accusing them of all kinds of corruption, and then swing full flow again. The pendulum swings full again after 2020, and again, the Chronicle is condemning anybody who speaks ill of the PPP and is castigating the opposition. So you have a newspaper that shows absolutely no sense of professionalism, and you got to ask why. And the reason is that the board of Chronicle is appointed by the government. If you put 2 people from the opposition on that board, 2 people appointed by the government on that board, and 1 third party on that board, when they hire their general manager, when they hire their editor-in-chief, when they hire their reporters, there is no way possible that the professionals, they should be professionals who are hired to do those jobs, will be able to take the kind of extreme positions that they are now allowed to get away with, because at least 2 people on the board will be asking why. And if in that boardroom decisions are made which are unfair, the 2 people who feel aggrieved will come out to the public, just like GCOM did, just like the GCOM people did during the electoral fraud, to say to the public, this is what's going on. Imagine that's what's happening in there, and the corruption will be held up to the light of day. There will be transparency.
You know what? I'm sorry. I'm very inclined to actually touch on a more important part here. Not more important, but equally as important. And I like to say this to all the public servants out there. We know that you are put in positions on a daily basis that you have to do things that you don't agree with, that you may find unethical, immoral, and you are put in a position that you have to survive. So you find yourself having to do what they are telling you to do, or you are in risk of losing your job. And I think that is probably one of the most key points. So those same journalists that are working for Chronicle, that are writing those articles, knowing to themselves that this is wrong, that what they're saying is biased, that what they're doing is not telling the truth, then if we can create a system that board is based with two PNC, two PPP, and one third party, then the truth of the matter is your job is safe, because what is going on in that boardroom will protect you. And I think that is what is key in this situation. I use the Chronicle. I like the Chronicle example because I've seen so many journalists out there work for the Chronicle and now had to go on their own because it really reached a point where they could no longer really just spew out the lies that are being told. And I think this goes for housing, this goes for public service, this goes for police, this goes for every single organization, government-run organization. If there can be a balance created at the top in which there's no one party or one person fully in charge, that protects you. Imagine a system that you can do your job independently and properly and professionally and not have to worry about being reprimanded because you didn't follow a decision that should not have been made in the first place.
I think that if people have the dignity, the luxury of knowing that if they do their job professionally, that will be rewarded, and that they are insulated from the kind of ad hoc and arbitrary actions by the people in charge that we see so often. The new class of plantation owners that come out and feel they can talk to the employees anyway, cuss them down, quarrel with them, make remarks about them. If that dignity and luxury is given to people that they can operate where they are, you got to increase their salaries. That will increase their competence. That will attract more competent people. That will give them the comfort and the sense of protection and stability and security to do their job well and go home with a sense of dignity. That's all people want. That's all anybody wants.
You know, just a kind of on a side note on the public service scenario. You know, I've been watching headlines over and over, and I always truly try to hope I can try to highlight it on my Facebook. I can try to speak about it when I can, but I always I've read over and over in the headlines recently that training being done for nurses, training. I think they're teaching Spanish now in schools so teachers could come and teach Spanish. The police, all this money from the Chinese or this one or whichever one they're taking money from now to give these police this training or whatever they're doing. And I sit there and I say the same thing, or the doctors. I sit there and say the same thing over and over. But I don't care. The more you train these people, is the more likely they'll leave. Again, we go right back into a system where these people are trapped in a cycle in which they themselves, whether bettered or not, the only way of them upgrading their lives is to leave. And we wonder to ourselves, and we can talk about the systems up top and what's wrong, but we can speak a little bit on what needs to be more immediately done to benefit whether the public servants or the young professionals here in Guyana. And I'd like you to touch on that a little, because we focus a lot on the government and systems up top, and it's a lot of bureaucracy and people talking about government. But the truth is, tell me how creating the system of a balance in parliament, of a minority government, can help the people on the ground immediately with these types of issues.
Well, I'm not going to pretend it will help immediately. You must have short-term, medium-term, and long-term projections. What I can tell you is that if we're raising our debt ceiling, this is money we got to pay back with interest. Right. If we are raising that to build 2-lane bridges and then tear down the 2-lane bridges to build 4-lane bridges, when the time comes to pay that back, and especially if the price of oil on the world market goes down, so that the revenue starts to go down, we have misspent the money that we had while we had it. And in the meantime, the pretense we are making about taking measures to trickle down the money to the people who need it, has not produced any results. That trickle down needs to be done in the short term and done immediately. It needs to be done now. But it has to be done in a way that is systematic. And the first step has to be to start paying your public servants and your nurses and your teachers and your police more. Listen, people say that will cause inflation. Nonsense. Right now, those people are earning $500 US a month, the kind of money that They're barely getting by. They are buying in the market to feed themselves for a day, not for a month. They are living on a shoestring budget and barely making ends meet. You are not running a risk of any kind of runaway inflation by giving these people a real and reasonable wage. And the first way to let the people at the bottom benefit from oil money, from the increased revenue you have, is to pay your public servants, including your police, your teachers, and your nurses. That's the first thing to do. That will stop the people migrating. That will incentivize them to send their children to school. It will keep them in the job. It will make them want to do better in the job, and it will attract more qualified people to those jobs. That's your first step.
And I don't want you to skip over the point, the fact that we have had maybe 70, I think Starbucks News came out with it, a 60% increase in almost across the board in goods in the country.
That's it.
How are you still paying them the same if all the goods have gone up? How could that possibly create inflation?
Another problem I've seen is that when there are increases, they talk about percentages. Now, the disparity between the people at the top and the people at the bottom is huge. Mm-hmm. So at the top level of management in the public service, especially those people who get in special contracts because you can't entice any competent people to do those jobs on the scale of salaries that's in the public service, they are making hundreds of thousands of dollars, sometimes millions of dollars, whereas the people at the bottom making $90,000 and $100,000. If you give a 50% increase, you increase that disparity. So there has got to be lump sum increases. The scale has to be revised, and the minimum wage has to be revised as a starting point, and then everything goes up from there. We can't work with percentages. It's a simplification, but it's also a way to help the people at the top who are already rubbing shoulders with you. Mm-hmm. It's got to be done more sensibly than that.
Gotcha. And we're coming down to the end of the show here, but I'd really like to understand. A lot of people will sit here and claim that enough is being done and the government is working, and we're watching the headlines.
Rome wasn't built in a day.
Yeah, there you go. As Newsroom and all of them and Chronicle would like to tell you, the progress continues and we're growing. And here's an issue that I'm having recently, and I'd like you to fill me in on it. I've been watching as a young businessman myself, as part of the business community. I have been trying my hardest within the last couple months to find a legitimate company that has come into Guyana to do business outside of the oil companies. And oil companies' legitimacy, we can get to the oil contract conversation another time. But nonetheless, when we say that these things are building and growing, I just recently again watched this, a big headline is about this black belly sheep situation, right? And I'm watching this fluff and these headlines, and everybody's saying, well, what exactly is going on here? Where are you coming from when you're saying there's no progress being done? And I'm trying to figure out how we can get the people of Guyana to understand that changes have to be made at some point if they need to have a better life. And education is one thing, and looking beyond what is going on with your family, with yourself or your friends, is understanding whether or not you can provide for your families. And understanding that the corruption and the small little deals that you have going on are in no way, shape, or form benefiting you in the long run.
You and I have discussed, and in fact, we've thrown it out in this forum, that our middle class are abdicating their social responsibility.
Here you go, please.
And I will say that to anybody who will listen, that it's all well and good to find your little niche where you're making your dollar and you're comfortable and you can build your nice house and all of that. But if when you're doing that, you are seeing poverty around you and doing nothing about it, and you're seeing corruption around you where people are getting inordinately wealthy and doing nothing about it, and you're staying quiet in the hope that your little bubble isn't bothered too much, you're abdicating your responsibility. Mm-hmm. Those are the people who need to be stepping up to show that they can lend their skills, lend their expertise and competence to really make a meaningful change in the society. And until they do that, we're going to continue as we're continuing now. On
that note, I'll give you, as we wrap up here, I'll give you my one little snippet as a business perspective. I realized very quickly that if I own a business and I'm trying to sell a product to someone and they don't have money, I'm not going to make any money. And I very quickly learned, and again, I guess it's part and parcel why I do things like this, is that until everybody around me gets rich, until everybody around me can live a comfortable life and buy some, a drink or some food and have a sustainable life, I can't grow. And I'm watching every day these people live in this little bubble, as you just said, that are earning this little bit of, this little pittance that they're holding on to for dear life, and understandably so. They have to survive for them and their families, but understanding at the same time, what are you leaving for your children? What's the next step here? What do you plan to have as a future, a future legacy for your family? And I cannot wrap my head around watching generation after generation of people own the same little shop. Generation of people driving the same vehicle their grandfather used to drive, at the same farm they used to walk, not growing anywhere, but barely basically making it to survive. And I cannot understand how people are not sitting here thinking to themselves, we have to do better. I cannot continue like this. My child, if you look around, even to the regional, look at Trinidad, look at the wealth in Trinidad or Barbados or Jamaica, compared to the wealthiest, and here we go, look at the wealthiest in those countries, to the wealthiest in our country, and it's laughable. How far do you think you're going to make it? How rich are you possibly planning on getting if our richest currently can't even speak to the richest, can't even rub shoulders with the richest in those other countries?
Well, that's slowly changing, but I think that's a conversation for another day. Yeah. That's a whole topic in itself. There are a lot of variables and a lot of permutations. Agreed. That need to be discussed there.
Agreed. Guys, on that note, it is 7:30. I'd like to thank you all for joining us. You know what I'd really like to thank you guys for doing? I've been watching the comments as we go along here. And from the time the show started to now, I've noticed that a lot of the comments have become a lot more in agreement with what we're saying, versus the first little while of which everybody was like, no way, this is the best thing since sliced bread. Well, we're going to be the next Dubai.
we have to give special mention. I've made a point of doing this.
Absolutely.
The two trolls, Terry Chaube, I haven't been looking, but I'm sure they're following. Terry Chaube and Barbara Barbs. Yeah. I want to give special mention to those two who follow us religiously and run interference and try to comment.
I like it.
Invite members of the public to examine them, look at their profiles, draw your conclusions, and please, let's try to be honest in our exchanges and in our conversations. And if we have people who specialize in hiding behind fake profiles, fake identities, just to run interference, that's the kind of nasty, ugly politics that I don't know how they sleep at night, but they do.
On that note, guys, thank you for joining us here on Apolitically Incorrect. I will be back next week, Friday, with another show. So please do remember to tune in wherever you are, and have a wonderful weekend, everyone. Take care.